So this presentation, it's called Beyond Your Lifetime: Estate Planning for Special Needs Parents and Caregivers. So this presentation, I guess to go over a few things before we get started. We're talking about today estate planning specifically for parents of special needs children or caregivers of special needs children. So always before I give a presentation, I like to go over a few things. And generally the idea when I do these presentations, it's meant to cover a broad audience and to kind of give you a survey of a lot of information. And specifically here, we're talking about special needs planning. So just keep in mind that estate planning is kind of this really broad area. There's all sorts of different things. So some of you may have other things that are important to you, but really in this presentation, we're kind of zeroing in on estate planning, on special needs planning. Estate planning is not one size fits all. We're going to talk about some different options, and I'll talk about this a little bit further in, but every family is different. So we're going to talk about some different things. And then it's going to be sort of up to you as we go through to make a decision as we go through this of, what seems like a good fit for me, or maybe that's not something I need. But hopefully I'll give a good explanation as we go through, and you'll kind of get a sense for what's a good fit for you and what may not be. Let's see, planning for the first time. Okay, so this presentation is not meant to be legal advice, so we will discuss some generally applicable principles. And for the vast majority of people on this presentation, I don't know anything about you. So really what I'm just really talking about here is some information to give you some education that you can take to maybe meet with an attorney and back up that information. And this is all very high level. So this is not an A to Z explanation of everything that could come up in estate planning. And in fact, we're going to skip over a lot of things really just to focus on special needs planning. So I'm, as I'll share with you later on, I'm located in Alabama. So just keep in mind too, that I'm only licensed to practice law in Alabama. So when I do these presentations, really, that's all I can speak on. I can speak in the law in Alabama. And so I always like to give that caveat that the legal advice, to the extent I'm giving legal advice, the legal information is really applicable in Alabama. I know there are people from all over the place, so all over the country here. So just keep in mind that some of the concepts that I talk about, they may be similar from state to state. And the thing that I'll probably go into the most in depth is going to be special needs trusts, which those are sort of a creation of federal law. But even though those are federal law, they have an underlying, the trust law is according to state law. So just keep in mind there may be some tweaks there from state to state. All right, and we will do a question and answer session at the end. So yes, and I do like to keep those questions to the end. All right. Okay, so jumping into the presentation. So generally some of the things that you'll discover on this presentation, why estate planning is important, and then how you can use estate planning to take care of your family. And you'll discover special considerations that you need to make when planning for a special needs beneficiary. And so, by the way, I use that terminology. And so when we say beneficiary, that could be children, that may be another family member, that may be someone that you're taking care of, that maybe isn't a family member. So I'm just going to use that terminology, beneficiary, throughout, but just keep in mind the idea is that's the person that you're planning for. So other things that you'll discover, the resources needed to achieve your desired outcome. So you'll discover how to put those resources in place. And we'll go over an introduction of some of the planning tools that we use. And next slide. This is for you if you're having trouble getting started. So maybe you're stuck in research mode. This is for you if you're overwhelmed with the amount of information available. And this is for you if you need some help starting out the conversation. So maybe you need some help getting an idea, even planning in this realm, what you should be thinking about. And finally, this is for you if you don't want to leave a mess for your family. So that's what a lot of this is about. So a quick introduction to me. So I'm Brenton McWilliams. I own the offices of Brenton C. McWilliams, and I live in Orange Beach, Alabama. So I put a little map there kind of showing where we are. So we're right on the Florida line in Alabama on the Gulf. I'm a graduate of the University of Alabama School of Law, Roll Tide. I've been in practice for 12 years. And then I've got a couple of awards. So if you like awards, that's important to you. I've got an AV preeminent rating from Martindale Hubbell. And then I was named a Super Lawyers Rising Star in estate planning. And this is my law firm. So we are an estate planning, elder law, and probate law firm. We opened back in 2018. We have 3 offices in Foley, Orange Beach, Spanish Fort. We're located in Baldwin County. And a little bit of our experience here. So we've helped over 1,200 families prepare an estate plan. We've got a lot of really nice reviews from our clients, over 325 5-star reviews. If any of you are in Alabama and you're interested in working with us, that would be a good place to go. Or if you want to learn more about our law firm, check out those reviews. And then we've got some local awards for the law firm as well. So the next slides, we have introduction to a couple of the other attorneys. So usually I'm doing these presentations for local people who are interested in working with us. So those are our other attorneys. So this is my family. So that's my daughter there on the side, Shreve. She'll be 3 in December, and my wife Crawford there in the middle. And our dogs, Weezer, our Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and then Pickles, our Boykin Spaniel. And that's the McWilliams family. And I always like to share that because on these presentations, we're talking about your family. So I always like to share my family. So I am the father of a special needs child. And so you saw Shreve there in the previous slide. Shreve is 2 years old, and she has CTNNB1 syndrome. So that's our genetic marker, CTNNB1 syndrome. And so in the context of being a parent of a special needs child, she's young, so that is a relatively new world for us. But I have for a long time done special needs planning. And so originally I got into it in the world of elder law, this is kind of strange for a lot of people I know, but elder law and special needs planning sort of have a lot of overlap. So, that's kind of a tip for some of you out there. If you're not in Alabama and you're looking around for, who can help me out with this type of planning, it may be tougher to find somebody that describes themselves as a special needs planning attorney, but you may see a lot of elder law attorneys out there. And there's a lot of overlap. And typically most people they're going to offer both of those services. So I've been doing that for a while, and that was something particularly impactful for me. So when we got Shreve's diagnosis, when we were finding out everything, what was going on with her, I'm sure as many of you have been through, it was crushing, so seeing that and thinking through all the things that we thought were going to come with being a parent and all of those things, and that a lot of those things are likely not going to happen. But it's going to be a different experience. And fortunately, having worked with a whole lot of special needs parents before that, I saw the positive side of things. I saw how happy they were, how they learned to enjoy, all the other sides of things, and it really helped me stay optimistic. So whenever I do these presentations, I always try to talk about helping people gain a different mindset on estate planning. So I find, how do you see estate planning? So I find that so many people, kind of just see it as this thing to just check off their to-do list. And unfortunately, there are entire industries out there that are really trying to convince people you don't need to spend much money on it. You don't need to put a whole lot of thought into it. You don't need to do much. And, the way that I think about it is, usually when we're talking about this kind of planning, it's for our children or other family members. And many people that I talk with, they have spent their whole lives doing everything they can for their children. And then for some reason, when they get to this one, they think, what's the easiest shortcut way I can get through this? And so what I like to say is I like people to really think about this as an opportunity to do something that will really help take care of your family and demonstrate your love for them. So that's the mind shift that I hope that people will make with estate planning. All right. So what is estate planning? So I always put this picture up, this guy with a top hat, monocle, because I know a lot of times when I use this term estate planning, this is the guy that comes to mind. A lot of people say, "Well, I don't need an estate plan." This is the guy who needs an estate plan, not me. And so, the idea here is to kind of show that estate planning is for everyone. And this next slide, this is what I use as the definition of proper estate planning. And I just like to read that off. So I want to control my property while I'm alive and well. I want to plan for myself and my loved ones should I become mentally disabled. And I want to give what I have to whom I want, when I want, the way I want, all while controlling the cost to me and those I love. So I can't see anyone right now, but if you're out there and you think that's a good definition of proper estate planning, just nod your head for me. All right. So my goal is to make sure you see estate planning as an opportunity. So the starting point for estate planning is really, what are your goals? So what do you want to happen? And then as you consider that, the thought process there is, when we're talking about estate planning, we're talking about care during your lifetime and inheritance after your death. So what do you want to or need to happen in terms of taking care of you during your lifetime and your inheritance after your death? So thinking through that, there's sort of two sides to that. So one, I think this is where I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of this slide, is we want to make sure good things happen. So if you've got some good things that you want to happen, some positive outcomes, we want to make sure it's not just an avoidance of pain. We want to make sure there's positive outcomes that happen. And that can be, for example, providing financial support for someone. That can be making sure that different opportunities stay open. So that can be ensuring family harmony, ensuring everyone still gets along. And then making medical wishes known. So any kind of medical wishes that you have for yourself, making sure that someone knows them and that they'll follow through on them. So then, of course, we also want to make sure we prevent bad things from happening. So we want to watch out and make sure that assets aren't going to get frozen in place for some extended period of time when we really need them the most. We want to make sure that someone doesn't lose their housing. We want to make sure that financial assets aren't put in the hands of someone who's going to mismanage them or not use them properly. So when we turn to special needs planning in particular, in the entire context of estate planning, it's often part of your larger set of estate planning goals. So this is kind of part of a subset. There may be many, many other things that are important to you, and this is sort of one area of your entire estate plan. For many, though, it is a really, really important part, and it could even be the larger part of what's important to you in terms of your estate plan. And it can tend to take a lot of times a lot more thought and consideration. So how are we going to achieve a good outcome? So there's a couple of things I like to go over in the starting point for discussion of planning for special needs beneficiaries. So the first thing is, everyone is different. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, but everyone is really different. So it's hard to give a really specific recommendation on what exactly you should do in this presentation, but we're going to talk about a lot of the concepts. So families are different. Some people, for us, for example, in my family, we only have Shreve. So we don't have any other children, and we don't have any other typical children. So when we look at the differences between families, there may be some pros and cons there. So for families who have other typical children, that may be great, maybe a great resource as far as in terms of someone to take care of your special needs child if you need them to. But of course, there's sort of balancing the other side on the asset side. So a lot of times there's sort of a concern, well, if we dedicate all of our assets to our special needs child, all of our financial resources, will our typical children feel like that's unfair? So that's sometimes a tough one to deal with, but just kind of demonstrating a little bit about, as we go through these things, how different family situations can create some different considerations. So level of care is obviously different. The type of care they receive, the level of independence of that special needs person. So that's going to be really important when you're making decisions on how you want to set things up, who you want to be in charge. And then talking about the type of public benefits available. So we'll talk more about that later on. I'll just leave that available. I'll leave that for later on. But the types of benefits available will be different from person to person, and sometimes that dictates other important parts of our estate plan. So on the topic of benefits, and this is kind of just preparing for the question and answer, I do not and I will not have an understanding of every single public benefit available. And so a lot of this, when I originally got into elder law and special needs planning, I really, that was a thing that really intimidated me a lot. I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have to know when somebody comes to me, I'm going to have to understand every single benefit option that may be available to them. And then finally, after a little while, I just recognized really that's not the role of an attorney. So that's not something that I'm really capable of. There's other people, social workers, people that work at agencies, all of those people. Those are the people that really you can turn to in your communities. And they have a good understanding of all of those benefits. But just to kind of throw that caveat out there. All right, so generally, what's the goal when we talk about planning for a special needs beneficiary? It's to continue providing support and care for that beneficiary according to their needs. And that's going to be different for everyone. And really, the thought process, I think, is, if I'm not there to provide that support and care, how can I make sure that beneficiary continues to receive the support and care that I've been giving them? And trying to get that as close as possible as we can. So we may not always be able to achieve perfection, but really thinking through how can we make sure there's some continuity there? How can we make sure they continue to receive that support and care? So we'll start off. I don't like to instill too much fear, but I think it's really appropriate to really recognize what's going to happen if you don't make a plan. So what I always say is if you don't make a plan, there is a plan. And so, question number one is, if there's no plan, who's going to make decisions about all of those considerations? So all of those things that we talked about, supporting care, who is that person going to be? And I'll tell you, if there's no plan, generally the answer is, I don't know. And just there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And then forever who that person is, what kind of decisions are they going to make? So are there going to be decisions that don't match up with what you would want to happen? And will financial resources continue to be available? And I think, honestly, at the end of the day, for all of these, if there's no plan, there's just kind of this shoulder shrug for all of those. Who knows? And that's not really good. So, if we don't make a plan, and here's where we talk a little bit more. So if you don't make a plan, there is a plan, sort of. And in this situation, a lot of times can tell people if you don't make a plan, there are some things that will happen. So, but when we're talking about special needs planning, like I said, it's kind of a shoulder shrug. So if there's no decision for a person in charge, there's some question marks out there. Will someone in your family volunteer to help out? And if they do, is that going to be someone that you actually want to take on that role? And if someone doesn't volunteer from your family, if someone from your family doesn't volunteer to help out, what we have in Alabama, we have Department of Human Resources. So we call that DHR, and they have child protective services, adult protective services. So is that going to be who steps in to make decisions for your special needs beneficiary? And then what kind of care decisions will they make? So when we're talking about that person, or we're giving that person or DHR discretion to make decisions, are they going to select a living situation that you would consider appropriate? And then finally, if we don't make an estate plan, we're sort of stuck with the default inheritance plan. And so what we see there is financial resources may be allocated in a way that doesn't really make sense. So for example, if you have 3 children, then everything may be divided up equally between them. And that might not really make sense if you have one child that has a higher level of need. And then sometimes we see assets may need to be sold along the way towards getting there. And so we may see a loss of housing. So considering continuing through that default inheritance plan, We have some cumbersome process for the person in charge of finances. So if we don't create a plan, then typically we're going to have to go through probate for inheritance. And it can be a really cumbersome probate process because, at least in Alabama, we're going to have a guardian ad litem potentially to be appointed for that special needs person. So we're bringing in another attorney, more people, more layers of complexity. For ongoing management of finances, we would probably have to have a conservatorship, which is a court-appointed individual that would make financial decisions for that beneficiary. And if you don't choose anyone that may be a family member, it may just be an attorney that's appointed by the court. So here in Alabama, we usually have a county conservator that makes those decisions. So once again, not ideal. And the conservatorship can be pretty expensive because there's a bond requirement. There's reporting requirements with the court that are ongoing. So just a lot of complexity there. And then we worry, is there going to be a loss of public benefits? So with this beneficiary receiving, the special needs beneficiary receiving a right to everything outright, it's not going to be directed into a special needs trust. So are we going to have a loss of public benefits? Are they going to lose access to certain types of care that they can only receive through those public benefits? And to get those public benefits, are we going to just have to waste money because we're going to have to go through spend down or something like that and not have access to those benefits? So kind of relating back to that, we want to talk about some considerations. So for how do we make sure that we continue providing that support and care for the beneficiary according to their needs? So examples of considerations for care. So these are things that you want to think about. So when you're going into estate planning for a special needs beneficiary, these are things that you want to think through and determine your goals. So what do you want to happen? So for example, what do you want their living situation to be like? Do you want them to live in a private residence whether maybe they continue to live in your house, or maybe there's a house that's set aside for them to live on their own, or are they going to live with someone else? So is there someone in your family that they're going to live with? Will there be a different living situation? So would you like them to be in a group home? Is there one that you've investigated that you feel like is a really good fit for them? Or are they going to live in a private facility like a nursing home or something like that? So, different needs for everyone, but really thinking through that is, what would you want that to look like, or what can that look like? Do you want to promote independence? So is that a really important aspect? And so thinking through, what does that look like? How can we promote the independence of the special needs beneficiary? So what kind of social activities do we want them to engage in? So participating in sporting activities, Special Olympics, attending sporting events, participating in cultural activities and attending cultural activities, religious activities. So just thinking through what social activities are important and how we can make sure that they continue that. And then family activities. So do we want to make sure that we encourage interaction with family members? So providing a means for the special needs beneficiary, financial means to visit other family members and a way for family members to come and visit them. Do we want to purchase gifts in recognition of birthdays of other family members? Things like that. And then finally, medical care. So how are we going to think through the logistics of how they're going to receive that medical care? And then what kind of financial considerations do we need to make sure that they receive adequate medical care? And then finally, not to be overlooked, so what happens during your lifetime? So I find that when I'm working with special needs parents, a lot of times, there's this laser focus on our children, or tunnel vision, or whatever you want to call it, and they tend to not really think about themselves. So that is a really important aspect of thinking through for yourself, and then kind of what happens during your lifetime. So making sure that you receive the care you need, and really setting all that up. And then we want to make sure also that there's the ability for someone to start taking care of things during your lifetime. So you may be in a situation where you're incapacitated but still alive, and for whatever reason, you're not able to provide that level of care. So we want to make sure that we have a way to start that out during your lifetime. So how do we make this happen? So once we think through those considerations of what you want, how do we actually fulfill your goals? So first we start out by putting the right people in place. And so here's kind of a list of some of those different type of people we could put in place, what they do, and how we make that happen. So first, that could be a guardian. So a guardian is a person who's going to make custodial decisions for the special needs person. And so you kind of think of like, almost like a parental role. And we do that through a nomination of guardian. So in Alabama, a person who can nominate a guardian, that can be done by a parent of a special needs person, even an adult special needs person, or if the special needs person is married, then a spouse can do that as well. So one thing I want to point out here that I've talked through with special needs parents is sometimes the beneficiary is independent, and maybe we feel like they really don't need a guardian, and maybe they're independent enough that there's never been a need for a guardian. We don't really see that happening in the future. A lot of times I will still recommend making a guardian nomination really as sort of more of a defensive move. So the idea there is that there's a concern that if somebody were to ever try to petition for guardianship of them, somebody who's maybe not doing something right, trying to take control over them, or maybe they're even well-intentioned and don't really know much about them and think they need some help or something like that. By doing that guardian nomination, even if it's not one that's really going to be used, we can exercise some decision making over who that's actually going to be. So instead of that, it being that family member that really doesn't know much about them, isn't in a good position to take care of their care, maybe even they're well-intentioned, but they don't really understand things, we can exercise some decision making to make sure that it's not that person, and that it's somebody that would actually do a good job and would recognize the independence of that beneficiary, and just sort of almost just block anybody else from coming in to try to take over. We also have in Alabama, and I'm sure they're passing legislation on this in multiple states, we have an alternative to guardianship in the form of supported decision making. So there again, for that independent special needs person, they have the ability to do supported decision making. So getting people on their team to help out with things without actually having to have a full-scale guardianship. So the more people that we can have on the team, we can have an advocate or a care manager, and that's a person that's going to ensure that the special needs person is receiving good medical care. This could also apply to other areas of their life. So an advocate could be responsible for making sure that they continue to, next slide, that they continue to receive the type of public benefits that they need. And this would typically be someone, it could be a family member, but it's typically going to be someone that's going to be hired by the guardian or the trustees. So in the case of a care manager, it may be someone that puts together an annual plan for care, that continually monitors things, that goes to doctor's appointments, checks on things, talks with the special needs person about the type of care that they're receiving, and sort of watching over all those things. Then finally, a trustee. So a trustee is going to be a person who manages finances and then follows any financial directions that you give. So when I think of a trust, a lot of times, we'll talk more about this later on, but I kind of think of it as an instruction manual. So a trustee is a person that's put in charge of finances, and then they follow the directions that you give them. So they're typically going to be appointed in a trust that's going to hold assets that benefit that special needs person. All right, so how do we fulfill those goals with finances? And we have a few sources of where those finances can come from to fulfill those goals. But, so as we know, a lot of times this can all be very expensive. So making sure that all of these things get taken care of can be really expensive. So we want to consider the financial side of that. So that can come from your assets. And one thing I want to point out here, there is a lot of people, a lot of parents, when they come in and make an estate plan, they'll just say something like, I want everything to go to all my kids equally. So in your situation, when planning for a special needs beneficiary, I would encourage you not to just knee-jerk do what everyone else does. I think it's a good idea to actually think through that And you may not necessarily want to go with that typical equal share situation. So really putting some thought into what are the financial needs for the future and how can I make sure that I achieve them. Life insurance. So that's another way we make sure that these goals are filled with finances. So life insurance is really important. And so when we're talking about life insurance, we're looking at replacing income, future benefits. So life insurance, my recommendation there, follow the advice of a life insurance professional. So meet with somebody and talk about all of that. But for my 2 cents, a term policy is typically going to give you the largest benefit for your premiums. So if you're really looking at how can we maximize the amount of money that we have set aside, a term policy is going to be how we do that. All right, so public benefits. So finally, that's, the other side of the leg of financial is public benefits. So Medicaid, SSI, Medicare, SSDI. So making sure that we maintain access to those public benefits. And usually that's where we bring in the special needs trust to make sure that we're still maintaining access to public benefits. So finally, when we think of those finances, this is a part that really involves some thought on your part. So how much is enough? So to think through that, we need to make considerations of life expectancy. So how long do we expect that your special needs child or person that you're taking care of, what's their expected life expectancy? And then when we talk about our desired outcomes, when we talk about the living situation that we want, when we talk about social aspects, family aspects, promoting their independence. So looking through and kind of mapping that out. What's going to be the cost of that desired outcome? So you can kind of do that on your own, make a budget, sort of look at what you're spending right now. Sometimes you may want to go to a financial planner, a financial advisor. Sometimes they can sit down with you and talk through that with you and maybe come up with some ideas there. And so a lot of financial advisors offer life insurance, so that may be a good source of someone to talk to really think that through. And they can also set you up with a life insurance policy at the same time if you don't have one or you don't have a large enough policy. All right, so next let's go into the special needs trust. So this is an often used tool in this arena. So let's start out talking about what is a trust in general. So a trust, first of all, I'll say that it is just a very flexible tool that we use. So we use trust for a whole lot of different things. And that's why, because we can do a lot of different things with them. We use them for a lot of different things because they're really flexible. So sometimes we get talking about this particular type of trust and what we want to do with it, but just know that there are a whole lot of different things. So anytime someone's talking to you about a trust, there's a whole lot of different things that we can do with them. So at the basic level, trusts are a legal entity. So they are this thing that exists. It can own and control assets. And then the two parts we have to a trust, there's the trustee, which is the person in charge of the trust. And then there's a beneficiary. So that's the person that's going to be benefited by the trust. And as I said before, I like to think of the trust really as an instruction manual. So you have this trustee. They're in charge of the assets of the trust, and then you give them instructions of what you want them to do. And then maybe some things that would happen on the occurrence of different events. Maybe eventually this other person comes into the trustee position, something like that. So a special needs trust is a specific type of trust created for the purpose of continuing a beneficiary's qualification for needs-based benefits. So a special needs trust is created by federal law because typically when we're talking about those public benefits, those are typically creatures of federal law. So some of them are administered on the state level, but typically they're creations of federal law. So when we talk about benefits, there's this question sometimes when somebody comes into my office. So question, do we really need a special needs trust? And sort of the starting point on that is a consideration of what kind of benefits the special needs beneficiary is receiving right now. And so broadly, those benefits fall into two types of categories. So first, we have needs-based benefits, and then we have entitlement benefits. So needs-based benefits are someone has to qualify that for those benefits based on income and assets. So For example, that can be SSI. There are two different types of Social Security benefits, SSI and SSDI. So SSI is a needs-based benefit. Others are Medicaid, food stamps, housing subsidies. So those are all examples of needs-based benefits. And then we have entitlement benefits. So for entitlement benefits, qualification for those benefits doesn't require consideration of income and assets. So someone doesn't have to financially qualify for those. So for example, SSDI doesn't require financial qualification because we're typically drawing off of somebody else's work record. And so there's other requirements that are required for qualification, but someone needs to have the appropriate level of work hours, whether that's the beneficiary themselves or maybe someone like a parent in their family. So that's SSDI. And then on the healthcare side, we have Medicare. So Medicare doesn't have an income or asset qualification component. So when we talk about a special needs trust, like I said, sort of the first thought process is, do we actually need a special needs trust? So if we don't need a special needs trust, we may sometimes use another type of trust. But first of all, do we actually specifically need a special needs trust? So thinking through that requires a thought process of, is the beneficiary receiving, or do we anticipate that the beneficiary will sometime in the future receive needs-based benefits? So our needs-based benefits are important. And then the other consideration is the beneficiary capable of, and is it desirable for the beneficiary to manage their own finances? So in the situation where we don't really want the beneficiary, we don't think they're capable of managing finances, we don't want them to manage finances, we may still opt for a special needs trust, even though they're not receiving needs-based benefits right now. And the idea there is to leave their future options open. But if we want the beneficiary to control things, then we may not opt for a special needs trust if we're not concerned about those needs-based benefits. And the reason is a special needs trust can be somewhat restrictive. So the special needs beneficiary cannot be the trustee. So even if they're capable, they cannot be the trustee of a special needs trust. So for a very capable or independent beneficiary, a special needs trust can be somewhat restrictive. It also may not allow them to be able to do the things that they want to with the assets available. So here are some tips for special needs trusts. So first of all, how are they created? So what are the different ways? And this is probably not an exhaustive list. There are probably other ways that somebody can come up with how we create a special needs trust. But broadly, here's a few different ways. So we can create it under a will with a testamentary trust. So for example, someone's will may say, and pretty much every will that I create for anyone with or without special needs beneficiaries, it's going to say that if someone is a special needs person, if giving them money would disqualify them for public needs-based public benefits, then we're going to have the ability for the executor to create a special needs trust under that will for that beneficiary. So that's what's known as a testamentary trust. So it is a trust that's created at the time of the probate of the will. We can also have a special needs trust created as a subtrust of a larger trust. So that's where if someone engages in preparing an estate plan that's centered around a trust, we may say when it comes time, when it says that everything in the trust is divided and allocated for the beneficiaries, we may say that one of those allocations is going to be made to a subtrust that is a special needs trust. So that's sort of a special needs trust housed inside of a larger trust. Then finally, we have a standalone special needs trust. So we can just create a special needs trust off by itself, and it is solely for that purpose. So it's not for any other purpose. And so we would create it right now. We may or may not put anything in it right now. A lot of times we don't. And so we call that a standalone special needs trust. So we generally prefer a standalone special needs trust. So when you ask me which is the best, all three of those tend to work, but we prefer a standalone special needs trust. And there's a few reasons for that. So one is since that standalone special needs trust exists right now, other family members can make contributions to that trust, and they can do it whenever they want. So after it's set up, they can make contributions to that trust. So that way we can make sure that it's not just going to be assets from you. So if you've got other people in your family that want to make contributions, that want to leave some part of their inheritance, that way we can make sure there's one special needs trust for everything to funnel into. So I was talking to my father the other day. He mentioned to me that he has this life insurance policy. He wants to leave it for my daughter. And I was, saying, well, hey, okay, we need to make sure that that goes to her special needs trust. So that's kind of an example there. The other thing with a standalone special needs trust, it's going to allow customization of the administrative provisions without kind of lumping it in. So, when we talk about making it a subset of a larger trust, so when it's housed inside of a larger trust, we're going to have all these administrative provisions that really apply to the entire trust. So by doing it as a special needs trust, we can make sure that everything we have in there, it really fits well with that special needs trust instead of designing it for the larger trust and then kind of bringing over all of those administrative provisions to the special needs trust. And then finally, just kind of practically speaking, a standalone special needs trust can be easier for the caseworkers that you're dealing with at various agencies. So for example, with Medicaid, often after there's an inheritance, they're coming back and they're reviewing things. They're making sure that there aren't new assets available to that beneficiary that are going to disqualify them for Medicaid. Well, our caseworkers, at least in Alabama, they're often not lawyers, and they may have trouble sometimes getting things reviewed by lawyers. So when we have, for example, a testamentary trust, a trust created under a will, that trust is going to be kind of buried in a will somewhere. And sometimes that's a really hard connection for them to be able to make. So I've had situations where I'm dealing with someone, and even life insurance companies, I've run into this as well, and they'll go, hey, send me a copy of the trust. And I'll send them the will. And they go, this is a will, send me the trust. And I have to explain, so this trust exists within the will. So it is a provision in the will where this trust is created. And so sometimes that gets a little confusing. And then also, so when we've got the special needs trust as a sub-trust of a larger trust, again, the caseworkers sometimes have to dig around to find that, the special needs trust within. And, there again, sometimes we have to sort of connect the dots for them. So if it's up here, then this is how it gets here and all of that. And really preparing that as a standalone trust just makes that process a lot more simple, which can result in making sure that benefits aren't delayed or suspended or anything like that. So another tip for special needs trusts, they can last for a really long time sometimes. So flexibility is important. There again, looking at the life expectancy of the special needs beneficiary. So consider that this is a trust that could last for a really long time, for the whole life of that special needs beneficiary. So flexibility is really important. And so some things to think about are flexibility to change the trust language, some ability on the part of someone to be able to adapt the trust language over time, and to make some adaptability with the trustees. So one, really making sure that we don't run out of trustees. So creating some ability for somebody to appoint continuing trustees so that, usually we'll kind of have a succession in there. So this person is a trustee, and if they can't do it, then we go to this next person. But maybe the ability also of somebody in the future to add more people on, because generally, if we do have that succession of people, and then we run out of people, then most of the time, if we don't build in some flexibility, we have to go to court. We have to get a court-appointed trustee, and oftentimes that's just going to be a lawyer selected by a judge who may or may not be well qualified to serve in this position, and most often will not know anything about your special needs beneficiary. So sometimes we want to work in an advisory committee or in a trust protector role. So there we're ensuring oversight and flexibility. So that advisory committee, for example, they may meet with the trustee every year, and that may be a group of family members who checks in with the trustee every year, finds out what they're doing, has them prepare reports of what's going on with the trust, and gives them some oversight. And so we may give them the ability to remove a trustee, replace them with someone else. So if that advisory committee feels like things aren't going well, then they can make a change there. And then we may have the trust protector role. So same thing there, the ability of somebody to make changes to the trust, and possibly even making changes to the trustee later on if things aren't going well. So tips for special needs trustee selection. So a lot of times we may go to a family member. We may do that because that family member knows them very well. The family member may not be interested in getting paid for being the trustee. So we're saving some money, but just consider if they're going to be the best option. So especially if the beneficiary is going to be really aggressive about getting money, and if they're not going to have a really good understanding of how the trust works. They may be thinking there's money out there and they know they can't have it. And they're constantly going to that trustee, calling them, yelling at them, whatever, and tell them, why can't I have my money? You're stealing my money. So all of those things. If that's kind of something like that has a potential to happen, then we may consider going to someone else. And that may be going to a corporate fiduciary, like a bank, accountants, trust companies, law firms. So somebody that's sort of a neutral party, that's not a family member, who's not going to constantly have some kind of interaction with them. And the trust is always going to come up. So every single time they get together for holidays or visits, where's the money? Why can't I have the money? You're stealing from me. All right. So kind of wrapping things up with the special needs trust, a consideration of the distribution standard for the trust is important. So there again, we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we draft the trust. So when we look at this distribution standard for a special needs trust, there's generally two options. So one is that what's in the trust can only be used to supplement government benefits. So things can only come out to the extent they supplement government benefits. And then what we're looking at is nothing can come out of the trust that's going to diminish the entitlement to SSI. So nothing can come out that's going to decrease the SSI amount. So that might be money for housing, money for food. And then we have broader discretion as an alternative to that, instead of that limited discretion, we have broader discretion where we tell the trustee that they have discretion to supplant government benefits. So they do have the ability to replace government benefits. So they can bring things out of the trust even if that would result in decreasing those amount of benefits. And so that really just gives the trustees some discretion to say, for example, make a decision. I would rather provide good housing for the beneficiary than not to be able to move money out of the trust just to make sure that they continue receiving their full SSI payment, and as a result of that balancing act, so maybe they're continuing to receive their full SSI payment, but as a result of that, they're having to live in not so great housing. So just leaving some discretion for the trustee to make that decision of, I think I'd rather just pay for this out of the trust, knowing it's going to diminish those public benefits, but they're going to leave the beneficiary in a better situation. So the special needs trust is typically going to end on the death of the beneficiary. So there's a question now, where does the remaining money or other assets go? So do we want that to go to a named beneficiary? Do we want that to be a power of appointment that's granted to that special needs beneficiary? So do we want to give them some control over that? So, all right, so a little bit more about special needs trust. We have first party, third party special needs trust. So main point there is when we have an inheritance or a gift or anything like that, it's important for the inheritance to go directly to the special needs trust, because if the money goes to the beneficiary first, then they have to form what's called a first party special needs trust. And that can be more restrictive in terms of what they're allowed to do with the trust. And it will have payback provisions. So typically it's going to say whatever benefits that they've received at the end of the trust on their death, if there's anything left in the trust, it has to first go back to pay back for benefits received before money can be passed to anyone else. So we have ABLE accounts. So those can be really helpful. They allow some independence for the beneficiary. They're typically easier to set up than a special needs trust. especially a first party special needs trust, and they allow, if somebody's receiving public benefits like an SSI recipient, they don't have to spend down everything every month, so they can save up some of that money without being disqualified in the future. So from month to month, as they have income coming in, if they hold on to it, sometimes they can be disqualified from continuing to receive those benefits, but an ABLE account can allow them a way to kind of build up some savings without being disqualified. So in most situations, it's not a complete replacement for a special needs trust, but using the two together may be really helpful. So through that, all right, yeah. So that's ABLE accounts. Okay. So usually I give these presentations locally, so I always like to go through some of these things. Things that I find in estate planning that are common mistakes, myths. Sometimes I will talk to people about some of these options we've discussed here, certain types of plans, and they will tell me things like, well, somebody told me if I don't have $500,000 in assets, then this type of plan is not going to work for me. So when you're choosing what type of plan is best for you, here's my best recommendation: is you need to really think through what are your goals and the people considerations involved. That determines the plan, not typically an analysis of, well, I don't have this net worth, so this plan is not going to make sense for me. The plan doesn't have to be perfect, okay? So sometimes as you go through this planning process, there are going to be missing pieces. So sometimes you don't have that perfect person to serve in a role, for example, as trustee, executor, agent under a power of attorney, guardian, but you don't need to let that hang you up. So remember, we talked about you already have a plan in some way, whether you make a plan or not. So we need to take that plan you already have, which is, if you don't have a plan, it's probably a mess. There's probably a lot of unknowns. And so we need to make that closer to perfect rather than shooting to achieve perfection. So we almost always are going to create plans so that they can be changed in the future. So we're making some improvement now, and then we can come back to it in the future, so that when we have that perfect person to serve in that role, and they come into your life, or you've had a chance to really, really think on things and how you want them, then you can go ahead and make some more changes to your plan to make it closer to that perfect plan. But I always hate to hear anyone say, well, I'm not going to do anything right now because I can't make it perfect. So you can almost always do better than an outdated plan or no plan at all, and then come back and change it later. All right, so you don't have to be an estate planning expert to prepare your plan. So you don't have to be an expert. The things that you do need to know, you need to have some goals and you need to have a desired outcome. And so there are a few things that we talked about on this presentation that you need to think through those. So if you can't come up with goals or desired outcome, sometimes I tell everybody, if you come in and meet with me, I really can't tell you what your goals should be, but sometimes I can share other people's goals, and that can kind of help people kind of make decisions about what they want. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. We can go to the question and answer session now. So I'm going to, let me stop sharing. All right.
Brenton, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I think this was great. I think I'll just open it up. If anyone has any questions, they can just kind of go ahead and turn off their mute and ask a question. It's probably the easiest way to do this. So I'll give it a couple of minutes. I have some questions myself, but I give other people opportunities to ask.
Hey, I'll go first. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very helpful. One of my questions is, how do you, let's pretend, I want to plan for, group housing or whatever that may be. How do you estimate how much you would need in a special needs fund to help with those goals?
Well, I think you should investigate a particular place. I've talked to people who have done that before. They've gone around and sort of looked ahead and tried to find a good living situation, a specific place of housing. And then once you do that, you could have a conversation with them and find out what the cost is, maybe even see if they can give you some projections of, is there an annual increase in the cost? And just kind of use that to build off on. Also looking at, Are there any public benefits available that are going to cover that cost? Are there any other programs? Is there going to be out-of-pocket costs for that? All of that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Hi, Brenton. My name's Nicole LaRosa. My son Jake is 14, and I just wanted to verify. So you did say that the trust, let's see, what was my question? So say if a family member does want to put contributions in there to benefit the beneficiary, it will not affect Social Security when he turns 18. Is that correct?
That's correct. So that's what the special needs trust is typically designed for, to make sure it's not going to impact those benefits. So yes.
Okay. And also, as far as the ABLE account, could you go over that just one more time? I wasn't
sure. Yeah. So ABLE accounts are kind of a relatively new creation. And I would say, honestly, to learn more about that, there's going to be a lot of resources online to learn specifics. But I would say where I see them used are they just are a way to create a little bit of flexibility. They're basically bank accounts, so you don't have to go to a lawyer to set them up a lot of times. So they're easier to set up. They do a lot of times have a cap of how much money you can put in them, where a special needs trust doesn't have a cap. They're an ABLE account. So that's why it's not, you may be thinking, well, why don't I always use an ABLE account? That's typically the reason, is we're going to run into some caps there. But it does allow some additional independence on the special needs beneficiary, and can be an easier way. And the example that I see a lot of people using them for is with SSI, to make sure that they're not building up assets that are going to disqualify them. So it's just kind of a way to give them some flexibility.
Okay, great. Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
Brenton, thank you for all this. I have a question on, what is your recommendation for kind of revisiting the succession of your trustees, right? Like, if something were to happen this year, we would probably designate someone to take care of our daughter, but looking to 5 years later, that might very much change depending on the capability of our parents, the physical ability, those types of things.
Right. I like for everyone to probably take a look at their estate plan once a year. And it's a pretty simple process. It doesn't really even have, you can involve an attorney if you want to. It doesn't have to, but just kind of sitting down and reading through everything and, looking over. Sometimes people will create a checklist for that purpose in general of, these are all the people in the roles. So you can kind of just pull out that sheet and see, okay, these are just a reminder of who I've named as the trustee, the guardian, all these things, and just kind of thinking through that, at this point, is that still a person I would want to serve in that role? Is that someone that maybe has moved out of my life? Is it someone that's passed away? Is it someone that maybe at this point, physically they may not, that's one of our issues that I have personally, is trying to find somebody in my family that could physically handle the taking care of our daughter, so just looking through some of those things.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about, say, child's born and you set up a college fund or 529, not realizing that they have the disability. And then a few years later, you realize, here's our situation and college is not an option, but you have this money in this 529 plan. What can you do with that? Can you move that into a special needs trust? What do you do with that?
I'm going to punt that one to the person that set up the 529 plan for you. I know that this has kind of been an evolving thing over the past few years that I've seen, where they are allowing alternative uses of 529 plans. Like, I don't know if they've done this yet, but at one point they were talking about allowing it to be used for private school tuition, for trade school, for things for that. So I think your best source of information there would be the institution or whoever that set up the 529 for you. But those are some ideas of maybe looking at some different ways that you could use it for the beneficiary.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions?
I actually have a question. So is this like an attorney that you would go to say, can you help me set up the ABLE account? Can you help me set up the trust? Like, is there a specific type of person who will baby step you through all these through all of this?
Well, there's kind of a combination of people that work in this area, and um, I guess I can only speak for myself, but a lot of attorneys will not have knowledge of every single benefit that's out there, um, and a lot of the non-legal tools, I suppose. And so you can find agencies that can help you through some of these things, or social workers. But when you're looking for an actual attorney to say create a special needs trust, create other planning for you, um, I know recently we've talked to some people in our states. People are losing benefits from Medicaid. Those, a lot of times you may find someone that describes them as themselves as a special needs planning attorney. But a lot of times, if you can't find that, you can find an elder law attorney, and there's a lot of overlap there. But it is a really specialized area. So it's probably not something that your generalist would have a lot of understanding of.
So I have a question. So as a grandparent of a special needs child, and who has a trust already in place, would the recommendation be then to put verbiage into my trust to pour into a special needs trust that they would have set up?
That's typically the setup that I like, is that there's a standalone special needs trust, and then yes, we would pour from other sources into that special needs trust.